So let me define this indigenous knowledge, and I'll be using like 3: indigenous knowledge, indigenous traditional knowledge, local knowledge, to basically refer to the same thing. What you could talk about is, this is an ancient, communal, holistic, and spiritual knowledge that encompasses every aspect of human existence. So that's one way of defining it. Body of knowledge built up by a group of people through generations living in the same area. Basically, you are looking at what is happening in that particular place. It is embedded in a particular community, contextually bound, defined by economic, social, cultural, ideological, and belief systems of that particular place. So the key things that we can get from this is that the knowledge that we are talking about as indigenous is knowledge which has been built up in a particular area. It is location specific, and it's built up through generations, through many, many years. And it's created by observation, seeing what has been happening and following what has been happening closely. So when you therefore go back many years to get this knowledge done, and it is passed on generation to generation through doing, apprenticeships. There is nothing like you go to class to learn about it. But it is knowledge which is bound by the location where it is and the people who are living within that particular location. And this is why I'm saying now, if we go back to the real indigenous, we may not have those many years to go by. So when I come down to something like local knowledge, you will find a number of people migrating from one area to the other, and they move with what they have been doing in this area to the next area, and move with that knowledge. And if they stay in that area for long enough, they create specific local knowledge for that particular region. The key thing is, it is really driven by what happens in that particular region. So if you're talking about knowledge on rainfall, it will be driven by the climate of that particular area. When do we expect rain? How much do we normally get? So this you can capture over many years of staying there. So that is the point from where I'm coming. It's not really the real indigenous knowledge, but it is really knowledge which resides within the locality where you are. And then the next thing that I talk about then would be, what do we mean by early warning systems? And I will go through this and infuse the local traditional knowledge as I'm going through. There are 4 main components of an early warning system, and I'm putting them very generally. And I'll start with the risk knowledge, the risk of what is going to happen in the next time. So this depends on the hazard. The hazard would be that event that may cause a disaster, or it's an event that happens naturally. Let's talk about natural hazards, and let's talk about climate-related hazards, because we are looking at early warning in climate. So our hazards here would be rain, and the rain would be intense or not there, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So you know the event that you're expecting. Then you look at the characteristics of that event. Is it an extreme event? Is it a normal event? Is it extreme in the positive, extreme in the negative? Now, that extremeness of that event can therefore lead to repercussions which may not be good or may be good. So we are looking at what is exposed to this extreme event. If you're talking of rainfall and it's a storm, what is in the way of that storm? How exposed is it? So then you start getting a feel of the vulnerability, the risk that that area is under, given the storm that is expected. Once you know that, then you can now start working towards mitigating the impacts of that event. Now, who is best placed to know about those hazards than the people who are living in that particular area? So the local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge of that particular area can help us clearly define the hazards that they are exposed to. That knowledge can also tell us how frequent those extremes do occur. So right at that point, we already see how you can use the indigenous knowledge in trying to build our early warning systems. And the beauty is, the early warning system is supposed to be for a group of people. They are supposed to use it. So if they do not own it, then they would not be able to use it. But if you're using them in even identifying their risks, they would start owning that system already. Then the next thing would be for an early warning system is once you know what hazards you are facing, then we need to be able to develop products that can give us that warning. And here we start getting a warning service, a forecasting service. In the conventional sense, we have the Met services doing the forecasting and all sorts of things. So you are monitoring through the rainfall stations, the meteorological stations, you get the data, feed them into the models, and get your forecasts coming out, and you have a product that can be used to warn. In the traditional sense, in the indigenous sense, we have people who understand through observation behavior of nature. It could be plants, it could be animals, it could be stars, and all those kinds of things. And repeated observation show them that if this kind of thing happens within this space, then we are expecting serious rainfall or no rainfall. In some communities, we actually have what I would call traditional meteorologists, old people who do the forecasting, and people go to them for that information. In other communities, it's a general knowledge. People know that if the fig tree or the gum tree or whatever tree does a certain thing, it means something else. So that's the kind of local knowledge we are talking about. And if you are able to infuse that knowledge with the traditional, with the conventional knowledge coming from the Met services, you'd get a better product. The Maasais have I think they're called the Omorans, who look at the intestines of goats or ruminants and are able to foretell what's going to happen. So we have different kinds of local knowledge going into this kind of service. So once you get that information, then that information needs to reach the people who are then to use it. So we come into the dissemination aspect. And that dissemination part is where you need to communicate this information to the people. If we look at the traditional ways of passing information, they were there, they were effective. The local way of doing it can be very effective. You know, you have champions, you know, this person understands the weather. When he plants, everybody starts planting. So we can use those people in our dissemination aspects. We can tie into those local communication channels to be able to disseminate by using their way of communicating, okay? So that dissemination is also important and also captures the, early warning aspect with the local knowledge. And then action, responding. This is usually overlooked, but this is where life really exists. And if you don't have that action, then nothing happens. So action has different components. One, you get the information and you understand it, and you know what to do, and therefore you can be able to act. You get the information, you understand it, but you don't have the capacity to act, then that becomes a bit of a problem. So you have the aspect of capacity to act and the aspect of understanding the information and being able to work with it. Now, the capacity to act has a lot to do with what people do generally in their livelihoods. And in that particular aspect, the building of capacity has a lot of traditional input into that also. So it's not just a question of the science that comes in through the information, but what is it that you do? Do you know what to do? If you are told there's going to be a drought, are you able to do that, to react to that in a way that that drought is not going to be too bad for you? And this is where now the traditional knowledge comes in. They used to plant crops that were surviving in their environs, depending on the weather that was there. So that knowledge to be able to act, you can help them through using what they have been doing all along, the local knowledge that they have, and that helps them understand and be willing to use the information that you give them. And then once you do that, then you go back to the monitoring again, and you keep on, and you keep on, and you keep on. So it becomes a cycle. At the end of the season, you start monitoring what is happening in the hazard, what are the expected things. I will spend maybe 1-2 minutes looking at climate information use, just talking about the impact-based forecast and how community information, local knowledge can be useful there. So we have the risk knowledge that I was talking about, and I've talked about those hazards and how the local knowledge can help us identify those. And then we go into the definition of the impact. They know how heavy rains have been impacting on their livelihoods, and therefore they would be able to associate those magnitudes with impacts. And from there, we can start developing thresholds, right? So we'll have the MET information, the agricultural officer's information that can give us the thresholds. But we can also get these thresholds from the community, basing our approach from the community information, the local knowledge. And you do some contingency planning, then you have your forecast. And when the forecast comes, you look at all this. Is the threshold met? And if it is met, then you have your early action. So this, then you activate the contingency plan. And even with this, if we incorporate them, it would be easier to pass the information. It will be easier for them to react when you tell them, in 1 month's time, you're going to have this, kindly do this now. I'm coming from the point of view of the community themselves, not from the government and the donor community. That is a little different, and the accuracy of the threshold in that case becomes a little bit higher. So, but generally speaking, you can see that using local knowledge, infusing local knowledge into this can be very useful. As a closing, the term integration becomes a little difficult to work with because we are talking about 2 different bases of knowledge. And to do a scientific integration becomes a little difficult to achieve. Thank you, Chair.